Please, just $10. A little boy begged to shine the CEO's shoes, then revealed the heartbreaking reason. The winter wind sliced through downtown Chicago like a blade tugging at scarves, numbing fingers, and chasing pedestrians into the warmth of coffee shops and cabs. It was the kind of morning that made most people lower their eyes and walk faster. But one man stood still. On the heated patio of a high-rise cafe, Graham West 35 sat in silence. His designer coat hung untouched over the back of his chair. His black coffee had long gone cold. Behind mirrored sunglasses, his gaze was vacant, watching the world move without him. Graham was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar logistics firm, a man whose life had become a blur of boardrooms, briefings, and back-to-back flights. To the outside world, he had it all. But inside, silence. Grief had been his only companion for the past 4 years, and he wore it like armor, invisible but impenetrable. He didn't see the little boy approaching, not until the child's small shadow spilled over his polished shoes. "Sir, please, just $10, a soft voice pleaded. Graham blinked, adjusting his glasses. Standing in front of him was a boy no older than 5, bundled in a tattered hoodie and oversized sneakers, both of which had seen better days. In one hand, he clutched a torn rag. In the other, nothing but trembling hope. "I can shine your shoes," the boy said, his chin high. "Just $10. I need to buy some bread for my mom." The words hit Graham harder than he expected. He glanced down at his shoes, already shining from that morning's valet service, then back at the child. He didn't speak right away. Was this a Con A trick? Another sob story from the streets? But something in the boy's voice cut through the noise of the city. There was no begging, no performance, just a quiet urgency, an honest kind of pride. Graham's voice came out flat. "Where's your mom?" The boy turned and pointed across the busy intersection. "She's right over there. She hasn't eaten in 2 days. Graham followed the gesture. Across the street, hunched beneath a graffiti-covered bus stop bench, was a woman, maybe in her mid-20s, shivering, her coat barely covering her knees. Her head was bowed, hair-tangled face hidden. She didn't move. Something inside Graham shifted. He pushed back his chair. The world around him blurred. The hiss of espresso machines, the whoosh of traffic, even the sting of the wind. As he followed the child across the icy crosswalk toward the woman, he wasn't sure what he was walking into, but for the first time in years, he felt something stir, something dangerously close to feeling. The boy moved fast, weaving between pedestrians with surprising grace despite the ill-fitting shoes on his feet. Graham kept pace, his polished leather soles slipping slightly on the frost-laced sidewalk. They stopped at a cracked bench beneath a faded bus stop sign. Huddled there, nearly lost in a heap of threadbare clothing, was the boy's mother. She looked barely out of college, maybe 24 or 25, but life had carved years into her posture. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself. One shoe was missing. Her lips were pale, and her head hung like a wilting flower in the dead of winter. "Mommy," the boy whispered, kneeling beside her, touching her arm gently. "I found someone." Graham hesitated, uncertain of what to do. This wasn't his world. He dealt in profit margins, not people. But this woman, this sight, it rooted him to the ground. She didn't stir. For a terrifying moment, he wondered if she was even breathing. Then faintly her chest rose and fell. A barely there groan escaped her lips. Graham shrugged off his heavy wool coat and knelt. Without a word, he draped it around her thin shoulders. The woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Who?" "It's okay," Graham said softly. "You need help." "I'm fine," she whispered, attempting to sit up. But she collapsed into him instead. He caught her, an arm around her back, shocked by how light she was, as if she were fading into air. "You're not fine. I've already called for a car. You're going to the hospital." "No, I don't want—" Her protest faded into a whisper. The boy, still clutching his rag, looked up. "She hasn't eaten since Thursday," he said. "It was Monday." Graham nodded. The cab screeched to a stop nearby, splashing slush onto the curb. Without asking permission, he scooped the woman into his arms. Her head fell against his shoulder. She didn't resist. People on the sidewalk paused, some pulling out their phones, others just watching in disbelief. A well-dressed man carrying a collapsed woman, like she was made of paper. Graham didn't care. He opened the cab door, helped the boy in, and climbed in after them, still holding the woman close. "Rush to Mercy, General," he ordered. "Triple fare." The driver didn't hesitate. Inside the cab, the heater kicked on, offering a weak warmth. The woman stirred faintly, mumbling something inaudible. Graham hushed her gently. "Hold on. Just a little longer." Across from him, the boy sat with wide eyes, never letting go of his mother's hand. "Are you a doctor?" he asked. Graham gave a small, weary smile. "No, but I know someone who is." When they arrived, a team of nurses was already waiting. Graham helped lift the woman into a wheelchair, rattling off what he knew: malnourished, exposure to cold, possibly dehydrated. And the boy? Check him too. As the clinic doors closed behind them, Graham placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. The little one looked up, face full of worry. "Will they fix her?" Graham knelt until their eyes met. "They'll do everything they can," he said, "and so will I." The clinic room was dim and quiet, lit only by the soft fluorescent glow overhead. The faint hum of medical equipment pulsed in the background, a steady rhythm against the fragile stillness. The young woman, now identified as Megan Carter, lay tucked beneath a pale blanket, her frame barely denting the hospital cot. An IV dripped beside her, feeding her body the sustenance it had gone too long without. She stirred slowly, eyelids fluttering open, confusion blooming across her face. Her breath hitched as her eyes scanned the unfamiliar room. Then panic set in. "Eli," she gasped, struggling to sit up too fast. Before she could cry out again, a calm, low voice interrupted from the corner. "He's right outside. He's safe." Startled, she turned. Seated near her bed, his coat long gone, sat the man who had carried her through the cold. His hands were clasped between his knees. His presence was still, but powerful. She narrowed her eyes. "Who are you? Are you with the city?" He shook his head. "No, I'm just someone who saw your son offering to shine shoes for $10. Said it was for bread. I followed him and found you." The words landed hard. She turned her face away, breathing slow, deliberate. "Why would you help us?" Graham's voice remained steady. "Because I could." Her laugh was dry, bitter. "People don't just help like that. Not here." "I know," he replied. "But your son looked at me like I was his last hope. That mattered." Her shoulders sagged. She looked toward the window, where shadows of passing cars stretched across the blinds. "I gave him everything," she murmured. "We hadn't eaten in 2 days. He had to have something, even if I didn't." Silence filled the room, but it wasn't cold this time. It was quiet in the way that lets someone breathe again. Then softly she spoke. "I used to be someone," she said, almost like she was telling it to herself. "I was a psychology major, top of my class at Northwestern. I had dreams, a nonprofit for kids who'd gone through trauma. I even interned at a shelter in college." Graham watched her closely, saying nothing. "I fell in love," she went on. "He was older, said the right things, promised a future. When I told him I was pregnant, he ghosted. Just disappeared." She swallowed hard. "When I told my parents, they didn't yell. They just looked at me like I was already gone. Told me to leave." Her voice didn't break. It didn't need to. The calmness in her words was heavier than any sob. "I tried shelters," she continued. "Some were full, some weren't safe. I cleaned houses, folded laundry, begged quietly. Some nights we slept on church pews. Other nights at the bus terminal. Eli curled into my coat like a kitten." She paused. "I told myself, one more day, one more dollar. If Eli had something in his belly, if I could keep him warm, it was enough." Graham's chest tightened. He had spent years surrounded by power and ambition. And yet, this woman, fragile beneath sterile lights, possessed a strength he had rarely seen. "I'm sorry," he said, voice thick. She offered a small, tired smile. "Don't be... You didn't put us here." "No," Graham replied quietly. "But I've walked past people like you for years. Maybe it's time I stopped." 2 days later, the snow had turned slushy, the streets noisy with the sound of tires hissing and boots stomping through puddles. Megan stood at the edge of the clinic's lobby, her thin coat clutched tightly around her. Eli was at her side, swinging his arms back and forth, humming under his breath. Across from them stood Graham, looking somehow both confident and unsure, a messenger bag slung over his shoulder, his breath visible in the cold air sneaking through the automatic doors. "I have an apartment," he said simply. "It's empty, just a guest place I never use. You and Eli could stay there, just until things settle." Megan's body stiffened, her eyes narrowed. "We'll be fine. We always are." "I know," Graham replied gently, "but your son deserves a roof and a warm bed while you find your next step. It's not forever, no expectations, no strings." She looked down at Eli, who was now tracing his fingers along the textured walls, oblivious to the tension between them. Megan's expression softened just slightly. "Only for a few days," she said at last. "Just until I figure something out." Graham gave a small nod. "As long as you need." Later that afternoon, they arrived at the building, a sleek mid-rise on the edge of the River North district. The apartment was on the 10th floor, modern minimalist but warm. It had 2 bedrooms, a stocked kitchen, clean linens, and soft rugs that made Eli giggle as he slid across them in his socks. Megan stood in the center of the living room, arms crossed over her chest, staring out the wide window. The skyline of Chicago stretched out before her like a painting. She looked completely out of place. "This is too much," she whispered. Graham set the keys on the granite countertop. "You do belong here, maybe not forever, but for now, yes." She didn't respond, just turned back toward the window. That night, Graham returned to his own penthouse, 3 floors above, and stared out his own window. Same view, same silence. But something felt different. For the first time in a long while, he didn't want to be alone. The next morning, Megan woke early and cleaned every surface in the apartment, even the ones that didn't need it. She washed the few dishes she and Eli had used. She folded their borrowed clothes with military precision. It was her way of earning her space. Graham stopped by that evening with groceries, applesauce soup, a pack of colored pencils for Eli. Megan opened the door cautiously but said nothing. Eli lit up. "Mr. Graham, I drew a rocket." Graham crouched to eye level. "A rocket, huh? I always wanted to go to space." "Me too," Eli grinned. Megan watched them from the hallway, arms still crossed, but her eyes had changed, just a little. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't tell him to leave either. Progress in her world came one quiet moment at a time. Weeks passed. Chicago's bitter wind softened as March crept in, but the chill inside Megan Carter had not yet thawed. Still change was unfolding, quietly, gently, like sunlight seeping through curtains in a room too long dark. In the guest apartment, Megan had established a rhythm. She kept everything spotless. She insisted on cooking their meals with the modest groceries Graham brought once a week. Soups, pasta, rice, and beans. She left no debt, no trace of dependency. Pride was still the thread holding her together. Graham respected that. He never hovered. He never demanded gratitude. But he came around more often than necessary, always under some pretense, dropping off groceries, asking if Eli wanted new books, claiming he'd forgotten his watch charger in the guest unit. He would often find the place filled with the smell of lentil stew or the soft hum of a cartoon playing in the background. Eli had discovered a love for drawing. His crayon art bloomed on the refrigerator door. Monsters, castles, and one recurring image, a tall man in a suit holding hands with a woman and a child. One evening, Graham arrived just as Eli was falling asleep on the couch, his head resting in Megan's lap. She was stroking his hair, whispering a lullaby under her breath. Graham paused in the hallway, not wanting to interrupt. The look on her face, serene, focused, full of love, gripped something deep in his chest. It was the kind of stillness he hadn't felt since Claire. He hadn't thought about her in weeks, not the way he used to, like a ghost chasing him down corridors. Now it was different, quieter, like a memory finally allowed to rest. Later that night, back in his penthouse, Graham stood at his window again. But he wasn't watching the skyline. He was watching the floor below, a warm light glowing behind the curtain, the shadows of Megan and Eli moving inside. It felt right. One Saturday, Graham invited them to the park. It was a simple outing, a chance to feel normal. Eli darted between the swings and the slide, giggling as he climbed the jungle gym. Megan followed behind, her thrifted coat pulled tight against the wind. Graham snapped photos capturing moments he hadn't realized he'd been craving. When he asked if he could take one of them together, Megan hesitated, then smiled shyly. "Only if you're in it, too." They sat on the bench, Graham in the middle, Eli on his knee, Megan beside them. Eli declared it their pretend family photo. Later that night, Graham stared at that photo on his phone for a long time. The way Megan leaned in slightly, the way Eli's eyes sparkled, the way his own smile, unposed, unguarded, made him look happy. It scared him, and yet he couldn't look away. The following week, Graham did something small. He tucked a $50 bill into a folded grocery receipt and discreetly slid it into the side pocket of Megan's diaper bag as he dropped off a bag of pantry staples. He hadn't planned it. The gesture just happened. She had been too proud to accept money directly, but maybe he thought if she found it later, it would feel less like charity and more like breathing room. He didn't expect her to mention it. In fact, he was counting on it. Days passed. He stopped by again later that week, pretending to need a signature for a building maintenance form, though no such form existed. The apartment was clean as always. Eli was asleep on the couch, a fleece blanket covering him to his chin. Megan answered the door with her usual cautious half-smile. "Everything okay?" Graham asked. "Fine," she said. "Thanks for the groceries." He nodded and lingered a moment before making his way back upstairs. Later that night, he found his wallet on his kitchen counter, placed neatly beside his house keys. That in itself was strange. He never left it there. He opened it and froze. Inside was the $50 bill folded the same way he'd tucked it into the receipt. Nothing else, no note, no confrontation, just a quiet return, like someone restoring balance to something fragile. Graham stared at it for a long time. He sat down the bill between his fingers and felt something twist inside him. Not guilt, not pity, respect. This wasn't a woman asking to be rescued. Megan Carter wasn't begging for favors or handouts. She was surviving, and doing so with unwavering dignity. It hit him with startling clarity she didn't need saving. She needed space, to breathe, to rebuild, to choose. And she was doing it with grace he hadn't seen in boardrooms, charity galas, or in the faces of people who claimed to know struggle. He thought about Claire again, how she had once said, "You can't love someone if you're trying to fix them. Love means seeing them exactly as they are and standing beside them anyway." Maybe finally he understood. The next evening, Graham returned with something else. Not money, not food. A book, a worn paperback. The cover slightly faded, the spine, well read. It had belonged to his mother. Inside, a small card was tucked between the first few pages. "I thought you might like this," he said, holding it out as Megan folded laundry on the couch. She looked surprised. "Thank you." He gave her a small smile and turned to leave without another word. It wasn't until hours later, after Eli had fallen asleep, that Megan opened the book again and saw the card. It was handwritten in Graham's sharp but gentle script. "You deserve more than survival. You deserve to be seen, to be heard, and to be loved." Her hand trembled slightly as she read it again and again. No one had said anything like that to her in years. She closed the book gently, held it to her chest, and for the first time since they had arrived, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, hope wasn't a dangerous thing after all. The following Thursday, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Graham's office on the 18th floor. His assistant knocked gently and leaned in. "Rachel's here," she said. Graham looked up from his laptop, mildly surprised. "Send her in." Rachel Holt swept in like a red-lipped hurricane, all stilettos tailored blazer and espresso-fueled charm. She'd been a friend since their Stanford days, and an early investor in one of his most profitable startups. Her loyalty had always come with a sharp edge. "I'm hearing rumors," she said, settling on the arm of his leather chair without waiting to be invited. "You've gone domestic." Graham raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." Rachel smirked. "You, taking in some homeless woman and her kid? You're not exactly the savior complex type, Graham." He stood slowly, his tone cooling. "Rachel, I don't think this is—" "Don't get prickly," she interrupted. "I just want to know if this is about guilt. Maybe a personal redemption arc, a pet project, because I gotta say it's very off-brand." What neither of them knew was that Megan was just outside the door. She had come to drop off lunch, a container of homemade lentil soup wrapped in a cloth napkin with a small smiley face drawn in pen. Eli had helped her make it. She had been practicing courage all morning, thinking she might finally ask Graham if he needed help organizing his foundation's community projects. She was going to offer herself, not as a case, but as a partner. Then she heard it. Pet project, homeless woman, guilt, She didn't move. She didn't cry. She turned silently and placed the soup container on the front desk, her fingers barely brushing the counter. Then she walked out. Back at the apartment, the walls felt suddenly too clean, too hollow. She moved quickly but calmly, folding clothes, stuffing Eli's few toys into a drawstring bag, wrapping leftover bread and napkins. Her hands were efficient, her face expressionless. Eli blinked at her from the floor. "Mommy, are we leaving again?" She nodded, zipping up the bag. "Just for a little while, sweetheart." She left a note on the kitchen counter, her handwriting small and neat. "Thank you for saving me, but I don't belong in your world." Rain had begun to fall as they exited the building, a light drizzle that soon turned into a cold, steady downpour. Megan held Eli close beneath her jacket, keeping his backpack dry, even as her own shoulders were soaked. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew one thing: she wouldn't stay where she wasn't seen. The apartment was too quiet. Graham stepped inside just past 7, rain dripping from his coat. He had come straight from the office heart, still thudding from the confrontation with Rachel. He carried a folder. Inside it, a proposal, one he had spent all day preparing. It was more than a job offer. It was a plan, a blueprint for a community outreach center he wanted Megan to lead. Her education, her experience, her compassion, it had all pointed to this. He'd finally realized she didn't just need help. She needed purpose. He wanted to be the one to give her that platform, not because she was struggling, but because she was brilliant. But when he opened the door, something was wrong. The apartment was spotless, but empty. He called out softly, "Megan." "Nothing?" He walked further in. The lights were off. Eli's blanket was folded on the couch. A drawing of a house with stick figures taped to the fridge, still unmoving. And on the counter, the note. He stared at it, heart pounding, as he read the simple message. "Thank you for saving me, but I don't belong in your world." For a full minute he didn't move. His breath caught in his throat. He read it again, and again. Then the folder in his hand slipped to the floor. He bolted out the door. The rain was relentless, a heavy cold downpour that soaked him within seconds. He didn't care. He ran calling her name, asking strangers if they had seen a woman and a small boy. He checked the bus stop where they first met. Nothing. The subway station where Eli loved the escalator, empty. The bakery around the corner where he had once bought Megan blueberry scones, closed. His shoes splashed through puddles as he sprinted down alleyways past flickering street lamps, his mind screaming with regret. How had he let this happen? How could he have missed the signs? People stared as he ran. The usually composed CEO now drenched wild-eyed shouting names into the night. And then, at the edge of Grant Park, just beneath an old stone bridge, he saw them. 2 shadows huddled beneath the archway, a plastic bag at their feet, a child curled in his mother's lap. Graham stopped, chest heaving, throat raw from the cold. Megan looked up. For a moment, neither of them moved. Rain dripped from her hair. Her arms were wrapped protectively around Eli, her fingers pale from the cold. Her eyes, even through the blur of the storm, held all the heartbreak he had never meant to cause. He stepped closer, then lower. Then quietly, his voice breaking, he said, "Please don't go." The words barely made it above the rain, but she heard them, and they pierced deeper than anything Rachel had said. Megan stared at him, lips trembling. "Graham, you don't know what you're asking. You have a life, a name, a future. I'm just—" "Don't," he said quickly. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." He knelt before her, soaked to the bone. "You walked into my life when I thought it was already over. You showed me what love really looks like, what courage is, what it means to fight for someone when no one else is watching." He reached out, hand trembling. "You don't belong in my world, Megan," he whispered. "You are my world." And in that moment, shivering silent rain falling like forgiveness, Megan reached back and took his hand. 6 months passed. Chicago's skyline still shimmered in the twilight, but the cold no longer felt hostile. Winter had returned, yes, but this time it didn't feel like it was trying to freeze anyone out. It felt like a soft hush, a quiet exhale before something beautiful. Inside a newly renovated brick building near the West Loop, warmth radiated, not just from the radiators, but from the people. The Willow Haven Center for Women and Children was bustling. Laughter echoed down hallways painted in calming blues and warm creams. The scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon muffins drifted from the community kitchen. Children colored at shared tables. Young mothers filled out job applications with newfound confidence. At the heart of it all moved Megan Carter. Clipboard in hand, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She drifted from room to room like a quiet force of nature. She knelt beside a toddler who had dropped his snack. She comforted a mother having a bad day. She checked the locks on the new cribs in the nursery. Her presence was felt, gentle but grounding. This place wasn't just her job, it was her mission. The idea had started with Graham, but the soul of it, that came from Megan. She knew what these women needed because she had lived it. The fear, the shame, the pride, the strength. She saw it all in their faces and offered them what no one had given her at her lowest grace. Graham watched from the hallway, leaning against a doorframe, arms crossed loosely. He hadn't said it aloud, but he knew he loved her. He loved her in the quietest, deepest way possible. Not because she needed him, but because she didn't. Because she chose to stand to rise and now helped others do the same. At exactly 3:00 p.m., the front doors burst open. Mommy. Eli, now 5.5, came bounding down the hall, cheeks flushed from the cold, his backpack bouncing behind him like a parachute. Megan caught him in her arms, laughing as he nearly knocked her over. "Guess what we did in school today?" he shouted. Before she could answer, Graham appeared beside them. His coat was dusted with snow, his scarf slightly askew from walking too fast. He leaned down and kissed Megan's cheek, a habit now as natural as breathing. Snowball fight, he guessed. Nope. Eli grinned. "We made paper snowflakes. I made one that looks like a dragon." Graham raised an eyebrow. "Now that I have to see." The three of them walked out into the early evening, Megan holding Eli's hand, Graham close beside them. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. The way they moved, in sync protective light, spoke volumes. They were no longer three pieces from different puzzles. They were a family. The apartment was warm, lived in, and filled with the quiet kind of joy that doesn't need to shout to be heard. String lights flickered above the window. A simple dinner of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and Megan's famous honey cornbread had left the kitchen smelling like home. Around the dining table, laughter flowed like music. A few women from the center had joined them. Former residents now, thriving now, friends. Eli darted between adults, proudly showing off his latest masterpiece, a finger-painted dragon snowflake. Megan moved between the table and the stove, checking everything, refilling cups, smoothing out napkins. Still the quiet engine of every space she entered. Graham, seated at the head of the table, watched her with a warmth in his eyes no corporate success had ever given him. He laughed at Eli's jokes. He passed the rolls. But something else simmered beneath the surface tonight. Something that had been building for months. When the dishes were cleared and mugs of hot cocoa replaced plates, he rose from his seat. "I don't have a speech," he said, one hand nervously rubbing the back of his neck. The room quieted. All eyes turned toward him. "But I do have something I've wanted to say for a long time." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Megan froze. He stepped toward her, heart pounding, and opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring. Nothing flashy, just perfectly them. "You once begged for $10, he said, voice low but steady. "To buy bread for your son. And you changed my entire life that day." A lump formed in Megan's throat. Her hand moved instinctively to her chest. Graham took a breath, eyes never leaving hers. "Now I want to spend every dollar every day building a home with you, a life with you, if you'll let me." The room went completely still. Then Eli, standing behind Megan with wide, hopeful eyes, shouted, "Say yes, Mommy!" Laughter rippled through the room, followed by a hush. Megan covered her mouth, tears already falling, and nodded. A whisper at first. Yes. Then louder, firmer, smiling through tears. Yes. 1,000 times. Yes. The applause was soft at first, then erupting. Not from obligation, but from joy. Real joy. Graham slipped the ring onto her finger. Eli launched himself at them, both arms tight around their waists. That night, as snow began to fall outside their window, they stepped out for a walk. Eli walked between them, swinging their hands back and forth, humming a made-up song that only he understood. They passed the bus stop where it had all started, the bench where Megan had nearly lost everything. Now it was just a street corner, familiar, but no longer painful, because they weren't running anymore. They were walking forward, together. Sometimes the smallest moments hold the greatest power. A child's trembling voice, a scuffed shoe, a $10 request spoken in the cold. That's how it began. Not with fanfare or fairy tale, but with a boy trying to save his mother the only way he knew how. And what followed wasn't a rescue. It was a reckoning, a reawakening, a quiet, slow-burning collision between one man's buried grief and one woman's relentless strength. Megan didn't need saving. Graham didn't expect healing. And yet they gave each other both. This wasn't just a love story. It was a story about dignity, about choosing kindness when indifference was easier, about how real family isn't always formed by blood or tradition, but by choice, by showing up again and again, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. In a city of millions, three hearts found each other in the unlikeliest way, and in doing so, they built something rare, something true, not a rescue, a home. So, the next time you see someone the world walks past, remember, it might take only one act of compassion, one moment of courage, or one glance that says, "I see you," and to change the course of a life forever. Maybe even your own.